Hello and welcome to our Insights podcast, sponsored by Value Edge Group. I'm Leon Herszon, I'll be your host, and I would like to welcome my dear friend Jim Boland. Jim is an expert in project management and heads a project management center of excellence of one of the largest technology companies in the world. So welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Leon. Glad to be here.
Thank you. And we had a chance, Jim, to talk in the past, right? We had a previous conversation, and I would like to catch up with you on what you think happened since the last time. But before I even go there, I want to ask you, based on your experience, right? You have a lot of experience managing projects of all sizes, mostly technology, right? What do you think are the main challenges companies are facing today? And how do you recommend them to address those challenges?
Great question, Leon. a nice question to start off with. So, look, I firmly believe that I think some of the big challenges that corporations are facing are similar with the challenges the world in general is facing with. So, I think the rise of disinformation and misinformation is a real issue for the world we live in. And I think that actually applies to corporations as well. And then when you introduce the power of AI and Gen AI, and I know we'll get into that in a little bit as well, it really, puts a lot of power and control into folks that maybe don't have the most honorable intentions at mind. So,
Yes.
A lot of reputational damage can be done on individuals, but also institutions and corporations by the deliberate spread of false information. You can extend that discussion into areas such as cybersecurity, data security, data privacy, etc. And these are all areas that I think corporations are really concerned with and should be concerned with. And I think, the only way to kind of try and keep up or try and keep a handle on this is to try and get ahead of it, right? And really be thinking ahead and not relying on, say, last year's trends or last year's data, etc. Is really forward looking and having the right controls, the right executives at the C-suite and the head of the corporation that are worried and concerned about this. And of course, drilling into a little bit more then on top of the kind of the disinformation piece, I think also, when it comes to AI and talking specifically about AI for a second, a lot of companies are struggling to measure the value of the investment they're making in AI. And in fact, I saw a couple of recent studies from our own IBM Institute of Business Value, and 64% of CEOs said that they're facing significant pressure from investors to accelerate the adoption of generative AI. But of course, with that comes the risk that we've all spoken about around, bias and governance and data integrity and all that kind of good stuff. And what we've also found is 60% of organizations actually have not yet developed a consistent enterprise-wide approach to generative AI. So lots of large organizations are tinkering it around the edges. But, to really look at an enterprise-wide approach, put the right checks and controls and balances, and really look at the business problem they're trying to solve, I think it will help with some of the challenges I mentioned earlier if they get it right around the disinformation and security and breaches and cybersecurity, etc. So I also, with the pace, and we'll get into this a little bit later, I know with the pace of Gen AI capabilities, the conversation is changing now from using simple assistants to, help practitioners work to actually agentic AI, where you can automate full workflows end to end, right? And I met a friend of mine for a coffee last week, and he's in a lucky position where he was able to take early retirement, and now he's having fun playing with some of the tools and technologies. He was describing to me by paying a very small monthly subscription to a vendor, he's able to design and build websites, including with a data layer to capture data such as order information. and he can build and design full websites with, data integration in minutes, right?
Yes.
And do it by interfacing with a single conversational assistant rather than worrying about the back end plumbing. So if you're now putting that power in the hands of individuals and startups, organizations where they may have looked at their competition traditionally as these large organizations in similar industries, there's a lot of disruption going to happen. And we talked about jobs and job disruption, but even at the corporation level, there's a lot of disruption coming where individuals can now do the work, that it took large teams to do in the past. But again, when you put that power in the hands of individuals, it comes up, the whole debate around, ethical behaviors, data security, all that kind of stuff comes into question. So who's going to win out? The companies that, adopt that enterprise-wide approach and put the right guardrails and controls in place versus those who are kind of starting fast and developing something and getting it out to the market quickly. And I'm not sure the answer is one or the other, right? Because, there will be successful startups, but equally there will be startups who, there's code that's gone wrong or there's data that's gone wrong, etc. So I think organizations need to get the balance right between pace and being able to, control and stand over what they do. And if you bring that conversation right back to the disinformation piece, you're just one step away from reputational damage that could be fatal for organizations. So, the disinformation, the security, the AI piece, I think they're significant challenges that corporations are grappling with and CEOs are grappling with today, with the pressure that they're under from investors and marketplaces to go at this with pace and show how they're transforming their organization with generative AI.
Oh man, there is a lot to unpack here on your answer. Really appreciate that. Let me start with the disinformation and everything that's going on with deep fakes and things like that, which is a big struggle, right? How people know what's real, what's not. I had the chance to play a little bit. I had a video that I recorded and then I translated in different languages. It is my voice. My lip sync to that language is really spooky, right? You look at that, it's man, I know it's not me, but unless you are really, really close, so there is a huge risk. Any person who goes out there, records a video, an interview, anything that can be changed, and how people will know, right? So that's I agree with you. That is a big concern, not only for companies but for individuals as well as all the damage. But I wanted to touch with you about something that you mentioned on 64%. I think you mentioned companies not getting the results they were expected from AI implementations, right? So, what do you think is the main reason? Because I saw a similar study. That's saying a lot of companies want to get into this the AI wave and benefit from that, but a lot of them are not getting the results they were expecting. Right? Why you think that's happening? Because there's so much potential. You just mentioned there's so much potential to be more efficient, to be more effective, to augment people's capabilities. People are going to do more than they were able to do it before. So why are those companies not collecting the results?
I think there's a number of aspects, and particularly large organizations. Their data is their key, their treasure, right? Their secret sauce, and the power and the insights they have in their data. How do they harvest that and make that available versus leveraging a chat GPT, which, being a very powerful language, but just gives you one version of the truth, and you would hope it's the truth, but is it always the truth? So the companies and organizations to be able to stand over the information and, the integrity, and again, their reputation is at risk here. They need to tread carefully, and, building large language models using just their data can be expensive and can take time. And, getting insights from that data, getting intelligence from that data with a view and a perspective that the company can stand over and, be able to, with 100% accuracy and surety, say yes, by providing this information to one of my employees or one of my customers, I'm putting my reputation at risk here. So I think organizations are, there needs to be a return on investment, and it's not cheap, right? Implementing Gen AI into organizations, leveraging their data, being able to stand over the information and the insights it provides does take a lot of effort. It takes a lot of effort to have the right governance model, to clean the data, to continually iterate on it,
Yes.
and the power of compute to run all of that. A lot of organizations are beginning to realize that, we probably, rather than have a, ChatGPT enterprise one solution for everybody, we may end up having point-sized solutions that solve individual problems, because that way there is a return on investment. And as I said, that return is not just the compute power to run these models, but it's also the effort to put in to get to that result. And I see myself with my small team in our project management center of excellence, as we're building assistants and agents to help our project managers, there's a lot of iterations we need to go through. And I think a lot of corporations may have underestimated in the past quite the effort, and probably need to be a bit smarter around placing their books and investing their dollars on where they're going to get value from it.
Yeah. Would you say that maybe there are two problems? First, people want results too fast. They think, well, because it has AI on the name, tomorrow I'll be able to get all the benefits, and they don't know all the work that needs to be done, as you mentioned. And the second problem that I was thinking when you were explaining that is that if you had bad processes and if you have bad data, being more efficient but doing the wrong thing, well, you're going to do faster, but it's still wrong, right?
Exactly. And that data cleansing, that data iteration, and, continually refining it, takes time. Absolutely, Leon. You're just not going to get the results. And the challenge is, you have the large language models that are available externally, and people say, well, why can't I just use that particular model and it'll tell me what I need to know? But, it's, will a corporation stand over that? Will it make a key business decision based on what, a third party large language model, where they don't know the data source, and that source is learning from what individuals put in, and some of those individuals may not have the best intentions? We need to think very carefully through that.
Yeah, yeah. So let's drill down a little bit on your experience managing a Center of Excellence project program portfolio management, right? What do you consider as a key success factor for a PMO or a Center of Excellence to actually add value to the organization? More and more, not only the Project Management Institute, but at all of organizations, they are focusing on value. We as well, value add, right? So we are focusing on value. So what makes a PMO, Center of Excellence, add value to an organization?
I think you probably mentioned it 4 times, Leon, and I'm going to mention a 5th time, the word value, right? So I think you're absolutely spot on there, right? And look, don't get me wrong, PMOs need to get the basics right. So they need to understand their mission, their remit, etc. But the conversation, every single conversation they have with their stakeholders, needs to include the word value, right? Is what I'm delivering to you bringing value to my stakeholders, whoever the stakeholders be, at an individual,
Yes.
organization, or business unit level, etc. And how do I measure what that value is? Because quite often value can be tricky for PMOs to measure, right? So if they're seen as a cost organization and cost recovery, and they're providing, resources that are doing kind of basic administration activities, and lots of projects are saying, okay, I need to have somebody here who can, do claim or time reconciliation, or who can help me with invoicing or dashboards reporting, all the way
More
up
like
to.
task management than project management per se, right?
Say that again.
More like task management. They expect task management, not project management, right?
Exactly. And then you move up to value chain to, for example, in our own center of excellence, where we own the education and the certification programs and the methods and the standards. Again, you need to ask, am I adding value to that? And you mentioned PMI, Leon, and late last year, they brought out a study called, I think it was Reframing Project Success. And I actually, it
Yes.
resonated very well with me. And they defined value as something that was worth the expense and the effort combined. So if you add the effort and expense, was it worth what you delivered? And there's lots of cases, for example, absolutely famous cases, particularly in the construction business, where projects, went over budget by hundreds of millions, but 5 years later, they look back and say, okay, we overran our budget, but the value was worth the effort and the overrun the budget, right? So,
Like the Sydney Opera
like the
House.
Sydney Opera House, it's a famous one. I think most
Yeah.
underground railways around the world and subways, etc. Over here, I'm located in Dublin, Ireland, and we've a famous saga which is running, building a brand new world class children's hospital, a brand new children's hospital. I think it's 4 years ago it exceeded its budget and is still not built. But in 5 years' time, I think, or 10 years' time, I think we as a country will look back and take, I'm hoping, take great pride in that and say that actually was worth the effort and the expense. Now, again, looking back at the PMI study, how do you measure value? And I think that's the key, because a lot of PMOs, and not just PMOs, a lot of projects struggle to measure value. And PMI, having conducted thousands and thousands of interviews with project professionals at all levels to try and understand what are the key levers. And they said, actually, and it may sound simple and straightforward, but they said the actual most important contributing factor to project success is actually measuring that success, right? And
Yeah.
and what they're saying is, look, if you define what success looks like upfront, okay, be that a dollar value, be that a market expansion, be that a going into a new market or new product, etc. Can you measure that up front? Building the children's hospital, right? What is the value on that, and what does success look like? And then once you define that the success, the two next things, again, which sounds straightforward, but I've come across many projects that don't do a good job of this, which is putting a measurement system in place and tracking that performance. So define what success looks like, define how do you actually measure that success throughout the lifespan of the project, and then tracking that, and then being able to pivot. And when PMI did their study, they found that only 37% of projects do all three things. So, as a PMO,
Oh, wow.
have you, for each individual project that you're running or you're involved in, is there success criteria? Have you a performance measurement system in place, and are you actively tracking that? And then, of course, and again, it's an interesting study you'll see on their website. They talk about things like which follow up closely behind that. Number one, which is around the management or the measurement system, which is things like, caring for your team, making sure you have the right funding, the right resource management, a solid business case. And something we within my organization pay a lot of care and attention to is what we call our project launch, our project startup. So, if you get your project launched and set up successfully, it actually goes a long way to project success. So, I think it's just, when people ask me about the PMO and PMOs adding value, and sometimes PMOs having a bad rep as being cost recovery and task orientated, I would reference that study and, challenge them around, are they having those conversations, those value conversations with their stakeholders, and have they a measurement system in place that actually they can, sit down with their stakeholders and say, look, this is how we define success. You've agreed to that. Here's how we're tracking it. I think they're on a very good curve then and trajectory if that's in place.
Very nice. Thank you. So I'm going to drill a little bit further into the project management area, but now I'm going to talk about the project manager, the individual. I mentioned to you in my comment that I think in the recent past, project managers were more task managers, controlling the budget, the schedule, and making sure the requirements and etc. And with AI and all those augmented capabilities that we have, they can dedicate more time to be more strategic, right? So that's a trend that I'm seeing, but I wanted to hear your perspective. How you see the project manager's role. I say project manager, project, program, portfolio manager, somebody leading an initiative, right? What do you think is the change on their role?
I think projects are becoming more complex in nature, Leon. And I think with agentic AI, in one way, people talk about AI and generative AI simplifying things and providing, tools and help to project managers and to every individual where, they can, their conversation to have with their assistant and they can get the answer in seconds. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of complexity involved in that. And I think with the explosion, we started off a couple of years ago and it was about assistance and building assistance that would allow and enable project managers to, look up knowledge bases and lessons learned, or allow them to understand what risks they need to be managing given the profile of a project, the industry they're working in, the offering, etc. And that was fantastic in providing those assets and tools, enablers to project managers. But now we're in the world of agentic AI, right? So that's reimagining how work gets done. So if I take for example, in my space, a very simple example, developing a new software product, right? And I think this applies across many different industries, etc. In the past, you'd sit down and you'd define your requirements, and the project manager might bring in a UX designer and a business analyst and talk to the stakeholders. They potentially go and develop an MVP and follow kind of an agile methodology to work through their backlog and a way to go, and they'd have their team of testers and developers and UI folks, etc. And then they start engaging, well, how do I build the infrastructure around this to meet my testing and my production? So working with cloud providers or whatever, and then pulling it all together, right? In this agentic AI, somebody, and be it the project manager or the product manager, can interface with a single assistant and say, my client wants this product to do this, this, and this. It needs to be double byte enabled so we can translate it into, XY languages. It needs to be this level, of compliance, meet this regulatory standard. Go build it for me, right? And in the background, that assistant is integrating and calling on different agents and assistants to go and plug in with back-end tools and systems and produce that end-to-end product. So you then need to think about, well, where does the human fit into that work, right? So in the past, where I had my business analysts and my designers and my testers and my developers and my infrastructure people, etc., we're now saying, okay, I might need a couple of hours here and there of, to plug that human into the loop. And those humans then are, instead of being dedicated to my project, are now shared across 20 or 30 projects. And I need them for an hour here, an hour there. And, and then how do I hand work off from the agent back to the human? Where does the human need to get involved? How do they test that the standards, etc., or what I'm looking for? When I hand the product back, does it, complete all the checks and balances? And again, you can use agents to do all of that. So I think the project manager needs to rethink and relook at how they form a project team and how work gets done, because work fundamentally is going to change. And, traditional job roles just won't exist in the future with the power of this technology and the pace it's coming on. So the project manager role, whether it's still called project manager or whether it's a merger of, developer, project manager, product manager, designer, business analyst, that role will have to figure out, how do I put this together? How do I manage the handoff of work, where my humans fit in, and slot into it? And that kind of work in a just-in-time fashion where we're reducing cycle times from months and years to minutes and days, right? So, that just in time where I need to call on an individual at, 10:30 in the morning because the work is going to come back and, they're going to hand it off to this, etc. So I think, and again, AI and agents and all that will help those, but I think project managers' role, the traditional role is going to change dramatically. And I think they need to get comfortable in that world and comfortable dealing with the complexity and the handoffs and the mix of human and machine in the loop.
So if you look to agentic AI, is it fair to say that instead of a project manager or a developer to work on one project or two projects, they're going to work in dozens of projects, right? So it's not that we are removing the project manager or the developer from their job, but they are being able to work more in more projects. As you mentioned, the human in the loop, because there are applications today that develop an entire website, as you mentioned, right? But still, you have to check, because it depends on your prompt as well. So if you prompt, if whatever the guidance that you give for your agent, it has slightly different misinterpretation, you might get a result that is not what you want. So you still need that human, that professional, right? But now you have more capability to deliver. Is that a true statement?
I think it absolutely, Leon. And I think the project manager, their role, instead of being heads down and managing, you mentioned at the start, a schedule and resources and the budget, they now need to rethink about, well, okay, how do I get all the plumbing in order, and how do humans get involved, and then how am I adding value over and above that through things like, well, really understanding what the customer wants, really understanding what the end product looks like, really making sure that, what I deliver is coming back to the value statement again, right? So in theory, and in practice, the project manager should have more bandwidth to really deepen and develop their relationships with their customer, with their client, and with their
personal
teams,
part.
and that personal interaction.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's really where, and I think the project managers that will excel in the future are those that are able to build that personal relationship.
Very nice. So now I'm thinking to invite you to go. We drill down. Let's go all the way up, look into all the experience that you had, and everything that AI can help us, the impact that AI is having. What do you think is the major impact, in your perspective, that AI is making our society, maybe on the work that you'll be involved, looking from up, because there's so many things, right? There's so many things. Which one you think creates the major impact in the work that we do, or in society as a whole, in the industry, based on what you're seeing right now?
Yeah, I think we're in, for the next few years, I think we're in that kind of storming mode, right? Referring back to kind of project life cycle. And somebody mentioned to me that you can relate this era all the way back to when we moved from farm work to factory work. It's potentially that revolutionary, and I think a lot of the traditional jobs, and when we say traditional, we're even just saying jobs for the last 10, 20 years, not jobs for the last 50, 100 years, but a lot of the jobs, and say that were created 20 years ago, 30 years ago, a lot of those will change, right? A lot will disappear. And for example, but that's kind of happening all the time. Like if I, asked you 10 years ago, how would you describe an influencer, right? You probably would say, or well, I would say anyways, is somebody operating in the shadows, having quiet words with
And trying
politicians,
to
trying to influence policy decision, and versus an influencer today on TikTok, and very, very different world. And there is a whole career path and industry now with a job role that didn't exist 10 years ago. And then 20 years ago, data scientist was a role that didn't exist. So I think that, there is a lot of roles going to disappear, and a lot of roles that folks in the last probably 20 years built their careers on, and, that will have to change and adapt. And I think, one of the challenges, one of the main challenges that I see, and that I think we all have a responsibility for, is, those entry level jobs. I've been reading loads of studies, and you're probably the same, Leon, where there's a huge dip happening in the marketplace, because right now we have jobs disappearing, but I don't think if we know what's going to replace them at the same
what's
scale,
coming,
what's
right?
coming.
Yeah.
So one of the concerns I have is this kind of the generation that are joining the workforce now, and coming with a computer science degree as an example, you will struggle. So it's the folks that, have a computer science degree, but, might have worked their summers in the local retail shop, or the supermarket, or, have gone off and done a psychology degree, or, have, that adaptability and resilience, and coming with multiple set of skills, as opposed to I'm a software developer, or I'm a UX designer. Because I think it comes back to the personal relationship again. And I would, I think as jobs disappear, and as we're waiting for some of the new jobs to appear, I think, the entry level roles, we need to figure out as a world. I think we have a duty of care to help, people joining the workforce, help them navigate this world, right? And when you do some studies around, mental health well-being among that, a 22 to 25 cohort, there is that gap. I think the future is very exciting, and I think AI has absolutely huge potential. But I do think for the next 1 to 2 to 3 years, we have, unfortunately, we have a gap between the jobs disappearing quicker than some of the new roles being created. And I think people need to start thinking to the future around, well, what will make me successful in the future, and how do I get ready for that? And it is things like, those personal relationships, coming with multiple skills as opposed to a single skill, etc. And then people like ourselves, Leon, helping people to navigate through this world as well. When I started off, as I did a mathematics degree, and I studied, and then I went into software development, and I navigated my way through, and I did lots of different roles, across different industries, etc. But along the way, I was always, as I moved up the ladder, there was always a support system around me, and more experienced people to learn from, etc. And I think it's important that that stays in place. And I think I put myself in my age profile, need to help and understand, well, what are those, and drive the discussion around what those new roles look like, and help the next group, navigate their ways into those roles. And if I look at project management, I think the best project managers are those folks, and this is Jim Boland's view, are those folks that didn't start off as project managers, right? They went off and did loads of different things. And in my organization, we actually actively promote and encourage people to go off and explore and do different things. So the kind of traditional linear career path is a thing in the
Yeah.
past, right? You need to go get different experiences and learn different things. And I think that's, that's even more of a reality now in the world we're living in. So I think equal part excitement, equal part, we have a responsibility to help people navigate that.
For our viewers and listeners here, uh, who might be interested to start their career, or they're starting their career, or want to give advice to people finishing high school or starting to think, what would you recommend them? Because you just mentioned how challenging it is right now, that existing roles are disappearing, but we don't have an exact vision what those future roles will be, right? So what advice would you give to somebody who comes and say, what should I do? If I was thinking to be a programmer, and then I read this statistic saying that 95% of all the programming is going to be done by AI. So I'm changing my mind. I don't want to be a programmer anymore. What would we say to people who come to us and ask for advice?
Yeah, I think they should go in with their eyes wide open, and they should be having that conversation to say, well, look, is that career that I might have studied for 4 years, is that job going to exist? And my own case, and I know it was many years ago and it's very different, but I studied mathematics, right? So, but when I entered the workforce in mathematics, there was very few jobs in pure mathematics, right? So you could have went down do actuarial work. You could continue your studies and end up lecturing or teaching, etc.
Academia.
In academia. But it was a topic I was interested in. But I kind of quickly realized, you know what, I'm not sure I have a future here, right? So I kind of, and I grew up from a farming background, right? So when I went in for my job interview, I was able to leverage the hard work around farming and the endeavor and an honest day's work, combined with I studied mathematics for 4 years and moved into a completely new field. And yes, my employer at the time had to take a little bit of a leap of faith, but they bought me, or they employed me as an individual, rather than me as being somebody who could write Python, right? At the time, I won't tell you the language at the time because it still exists, but it's not
Well,
cool.
I'm still at the time of COBOL, Fortran, and stuff like that. So yes.
You and I have probably similar vintage, Leon, but yes, absolutely. So, I think people need to kind of don't lose heart, but think of them as an individual and the skills they bring. And it could be an opportunity to reskill or upskill, right? And if they have to go and take a part-time job in the local retail store, or go work in, a completely different industry, or whatever, that's not a bad thing, right? Because I do think in the next, 3 to 5 years, new roles will appear that we haven't thought of. And some roles will disappear. And I think, it's not, it would be naive of me to say we need, 1 million computer engineering graduates coming out next year for the next 5 years. The reality is we won't, but we will need 1 million graduates, but spread across different areas. So I think focus on you as an individual, what skills you bring, and look for opportunities to upskill and reskill, which you may believe, look, this is not what I want, but in the short term, it's you hopefully have 40, 50 years of a career ahead of you.
So are you more of a optimistic or pessimistic when it relates to AI? What is your position? Because we always have one or another is more towards one way or another. Are you more an optimistic, I assume?
I'm. It's funny. My wife and I joke all the time, Leon, about this. She is glass overflowing with optimism. I believe I'm glass half full, but she would tell me I'm empty glass. That I'm a complete pessimist. but I think pessimists think they're realists. I think it can offer incredible opportunities, right? And I look at the problems the world is grappling with around climate change, around disease control, around and climate change, of course, has knock-on impacts around poverty, food, sustainability, all of that. I think AI offers, absolutely massive potential in those areas. So from that perspective, I'm optimistic that, the next generations will be better off. I just believe we are going through a bit of turmoil. And I believe that the world, when you look at everything that's going on in the world, and it's not just AI, but when you throw Gen AI in on top of everything else, we're in this kind of perfect storm, and we need to navigate our way through that, and each of us take responsibility for that, but also help the next generation coming. So I'm optimistic around the potential, but we need to be really careful we don't have a lost generation and we bring everyone with us on the journey.
Nice, nice. Thank you. Before I let you go, is there any article, paper, survey that you read recently that was kind of significant for you that you would like to share with our viewers and listeners here?
Well, from a project management perspective, I like that study on reframing project success, and I would challenge all project managers to relook at that. It may seem straightforward, but there's a lot of really good lessons there. And then I've been reading up like everyone else on the impact of AI on the workforce, and particularly around the Gen Z workforce and, graduate jobs and the fear and concerns. And I would encourage people to do their research and read up on, no particular one article, but start, reading and researching and saying, okay, while I'm waiting for this new world, how do I future-proof myself, even if I don't know what role I will be in 5 years' time? How do I prepare myself for that? And what are the potential areas I can go down, be it studying, be it taking a job somewhere else, getting a mentor, coach to support, etc. Do your research, read up on that. And, I believe if we ride this wave of uncertainty, we can all come out better at the end of it.
All right. Final thoughts, Jim, before I let you go.
Yeah, no, I think, I think we've kind of gone through it all, Leon, and I suppose taking that big macro view and that helicopter view, I think we all have, and I go back to, and I firmly believe we all have a personal responsibility to help make the world better, right? And, if you combine the challenges we're having with conflict around the world, with, AI, what's the impact that's going to have with political tensions, climate change, etc. I think in our own small way, we're seeing green shoots with that. When you look at what China's doing around sustainable and green energy and other countries, I think we're in this stage where in 10 years' time we could be standing back and going, "Wow, what a journey!" And I would hope we've come out of it stronger, and we've more clarity on what work of the future looks like, and we have a climate that we can know is on the right trajectory, etc. So I'm reasonably positive, but we as individuals need to take care of each other and look after each other.
Jim, always a pleasure. I really love our conversation, and let's keep doing that. So thank you very much again.
Thank you, Leon. The pleasure is mine as well. Thank you.